pleasure to welcome you. If you've been here before, welcome back. If tonight is your first time here, I'd like to welcome you to our special Thursday night evening tonight. I'm thrilled to host and to introduce on behalf of RAC, Eamon O'Kane, Intimate Expansive. And I can't wait to have you leave our lecture and our address here and go up and see the show that the team here has put together. Literally, it is fantastic. So I hope you feel the same way. It's the first major exhibition that we have for 2018. We have 3 big shows this year, and this is the first of them. So you're here on opening night of that event. The show became a small show at the beginning, and it greatly expanded due to Eamon's enthusiasm and our curator, Sheila Dickinson's interest in the show. It's a full retrospective, and so it does cover the entire second floor. Be sure you see every room of it. And it builds on one of the emphases that we're trying to address at RAC between the local and the global. And so an element of the show addresses Frank Lloyd Wright and 3 homes that were built here in the Rochester area that Eamon, as a fan of and influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, has chosen to paint. We not only have an exhibition for this show, we have additional programming. We have trolley tours that will be going to those 3 homes so that you can view them and see them. We have parent gathering sessions that build on ideas that are presented in the show. And then we also have workshops that we'll be putting on to address those ideas. So we're also looking to make exhibitions here come alive, be involving, and be accessible to our public. What I'd like to do now is just, I guess the last thing I'd like to say is, at least right now, we greatly appreciate our members. Our members help make the Art Center live, and it's one of our goals to increase our value to members by way of building in benefits to them, but then also putting on programming and having exhibitions that attract new members. So if you're not a member, we'd certainly love to have you join us. You can meet one of the individuals at the front desk, or you can certainly come up to me. If you're a follower on social media, we're all over Facebook, we're on Instagram. You can catch us at rochesterartcenter.org, and I believe occasionally on TV, as Channel 6 is here tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the curator here at RAC that put together this amazing show, Sheila Dickinson.
Thank you so much for coming this evening. It's really a delight that I get to introduce Eamon O'Kane for his solo retrospective here at the Rochester Art Center in Intimate Expansive. And so, interestingly enough, Eamon and I kind of go back about 15 years. I was a lecturer at the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. I taught his 2 younger brothers. I also worked with his sister Mary Ann as part of the Association of International Art Critics when I was running that organization in Dublin. And so I was really excited that he had his Freuble studio, the Institute for Creativity, installed on the 3rd floor here. But I really wanted to see how these ideas that he was bringing into the museum and into art about children's play and about Freuble and his influences on Frank Lloyd Wright, on Walter Gropius, on Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, like all these major architects of modernist works were influenced by Freuble. And so I really wanted to expand upon that. And so I approached Eamon to see about how we could make that happen. And as well, I met him in 2016 when he came to Rochester in order to pursue his interest in Frank Lloyd Wright and visit the 3 homes here, include going into the McBean home, and as well as go and visit Taliesin and do paintings of all of those locations. The 3 homes here, and then Taliesin. And so that is sort of the introduction into the first room of the exhibition. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Eamon, like the amazing things he's accomplished and his relatively short career that he probably won't say on his own behalf. So Eamon O'Kane was born in 1974 in a rural part of Donegal, which is the northwestern county in Ireland. He is currently living in Odense, Denmark, and teaches full-time in Bergen, Norway as a professor of art. He has shown in New York, San Francisco, LA, and in Nebraska. He has had a Fulbright scholarship at Parsons College in New York, and he has had over 40 solo exhibitions throughout Europe and in America, as well as many group exhibitions. So his artwork is in numerous public and private collections worldwide, including Deutsche Bank, Microsoft, Bank of Ireland collection, Country Bank New York, Unibank Denmark, and so he's widely collected and it's represented here in America, in San Francisco, New York, London, and Berlin. So without further ado, I'm going to have Eamon share with you about his work. He's going to speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for some questions if you'd like to ask him. And then as well, we'll have time afterwards in the reception if you'd like to speak to Eamon or myself about that work. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Brian, for a wonderful introduction, and thank you, Sheila, for another wonderful introduction. I'd like to also thank Brian and Sheila for inviting me here to do the exhibition. I'd also like to thank the whole team at Rochester Art Center. They've been incredibly professional, amazingly welcoming. I've been given a tour of Minneapolis by Sheila. I met a group of artists up there. I met an old friend, mutual friend up there. We had a wonderful dinner last night, and there's a fantastic crew here. I'd like to thank Evan for being fantastic on the install team, Emily for all the work that she's been doing in setting up this talk, Abby for an amazing job, Callie, I just hope I remember everyone, Mary Beth, Katya for absolutely incredible work, and Kimberly. Did I get everyone? Hope so. Chris, can't forget Chris. Chris has been absolutely indispensable, and he's produced an interview which I'm sure he's videoing right now, but I'm sure he's going to be editing later on, which you can see. I have put together a talk today. One of my tendencies is to show too much and talk too much, so I'm going to do that again. And I'll try and pack it all into 40 minutes. There's hundreds of slides, but some I'll whisk through and others I'll go in a bit in depth. I thought I'd go back 20 years to start with, because I thought it was important to begin with my first experience in America. As Sheila said, I was a Fulbright scholar, so was my wife. We kind of made a deal. My wife Anya is Danish, and we made a deal that we would both apply for universities in New York and apply for Fulbrights, and if one of us got in, the other would try for a green card and work in a bar or restaurant or something. But we both got Fulbrights, and we both got in, and we both lived in Greenwich Village for a year. My wife went to NYU and studied performance studies theory and dance history. And I went to Parsons to study a second master's in design technology. Just one thing to add as well in relation to that, ever since the age of 4, I've been institutionalized in a good way, obviously, either being taught or teaching. So there's only been one gap in my whole career where I had a visiting research fellowship at an English university, and that gap allowed me to do exhibitions and work as an artist and be a stay-at-home dad. That was a 3-year gap. All the rest of the time I've either been teaching or being taught. So that's just something to add, that's kind of the thing that's flowing through. everything I'm doing. So education is a big part of what I'm doing, and being a father and I guess a husband is a very big part of it as well. So the works I'm going to start with, this is from my first Masters exhibition in Belfast, and these are large-scale photographs. I did a trip around Europe, visiting about 15 cities, kind of a road trip around Europe, visiting 15 cities in the space of a month. And these were photographs, large-scale photographs that I produced. They're kind of like painting because they're essentially making the photographs in the moment. So they're not digital photographs, they're analog photographs, and because of the scale, they're about 6 foot by 4 foot, I had to construct kind of sculptural elements to, it's called dodging and burning, so you're kind of making it in the moment, and they are essentially slides, but used the way negatives would be used, so you get these fantastic colors in them. They're based on a book I read by Italo Calvino called Invisible Cities, and they then led on to a series of works I did based on a road trip across America. So in this road trip across America, I produced a series of photographs, but I also produced 365 little paintings, and I called them After Kafka's America, because in the lead up to my trip across America, I got sponsorship from Kodak and got a travel award from a gallery in Ireland. And we went traveling across the States, basically cutting right through the middle of the States and across from the east to west coast and back again by Greyhound. So it was a pretty cool experience, and I took several thousand photographs, about 3,000 photographs, analog photographs, because there wasn't so much digital at that time, which was 1999. And in the lead up to the trip, because Kafka never visited America, but he wrote this book, America, which was one of his most positive books. He's quite a dark writer, really. But he wrote this book, America, and I was interested. Number one, he hadn't finished it, and number two, he had never been to America. So he wrote the book from secondary source material. So I made up my diary before I went to America. I spent months writing this 14-week diary, and it was a 6-week diary, and we visited 14 states in the duration of the trip. And then I wrote a real diary while I was traveling. So these works were sort of leading up to this. They were leading up to a series of paintings of the different states that we visited in America. These are different cities throughout the world with large-scale paintings. This is an exhibition in Copenhagen. Slide's a bit, it's because it's scanned, it's not a digital image, it's a bit off. But you would see this as a panorama of Copenhagen, a drawing on canvas. So there's lots of details. These are about 16 or 17 feet by about 10 or 12 feet in size. At this period of time as well, I was making text paintings, and I also made these sculptures, which were kind of trying to figure out, I guess they were to do with the diaries and things that I was writing, but they were also, for example, making my trunk before I went to America. So this is excerpts from travel brochures about America written onto the trunk. This is a huge painting which is in the Bank of Ireland collection, and it's a painting of all the people I remember seeing or meeting. These are different travel locations, different galleries in the world. These two paintings, the red one is all the jobs I would like to do. The green one is all the jobs I would like to do. I've had several lifetimes, and the red one is all the jobs I wouldn't like to do. I've had several lifetimes. So there's a lot of kind of collecting, thinking about my own position as an artist, but just also as a human being, and kind of using myself as a vehicle or as a filter to try and explore the world. I'm showing sort of just skimming through works. There's a lot more of these works in that period. So this is around 1999, about 21 years ago. 20 years ago. Then another example was when I was a kid growing up, I collected Star Wars, and I've got a huge Star Wars collection which my kids now are playing away with. It's two small boys, well not that small, 10 and 12 years old. And this series is where I'm trying to come to terms with the fact I can't play with them anymore. So it's called, I find it difficult to justify playing with these toys, so I think I'll paint them. And it's again about collecting and about nostalgia and about lots of these different things. These were drawings on a panel of different artists that have influenced me, portraits of them. This was a commission for the City Council in Belfast, where I did 142 little paintings of Belfast. So it was kind of coming to terms with the city I was born in, but never lived in until I was studying. And this is a series called Fiction Lands. There's sort of tiny little postcard paintings, and there's just imaginary landscapes, and they get installed either on a grid like this or in a line. You'll see in the exhibition upstairs. We have the Ideal Collection presented in a similar way. And then this is a small painting. It's about the size of the book that I inherited from my father, Franz Kafka's America. So it's life-size painting of the book. And then these are some of the paintings. Unfortunately, the slides are quite dark, but they're just snapshot size. And there, as I said, there's 365 of them. So there's a mixture, one for each day of the year, and there's a mixture of photographs I took from travel brochures before I got over here, and then photographs that I took during the trip. So there's this whole kind of mixture between fact and fiction. And this is the way they were installed. This is at the Frankfurt Art Fair, and there's installed like a line here. You can see some of the images of Utah, Arches National Park, and so on. Oh, and also World Trade Center, on top of that as well. These are paintings of travel brochures. And then, so that's kind of an introduction to some of the early work. I'm going to skip forward a bit, and this is in 2004. So I'm editing out quite a lot of works. I'm not showing you any of the stuff I did prior to my master's. As you can see from the show, and you'll see from this talk, I'm very prolific. I'm kind of working all the time, but I've never seen a need to compromise my life for my artwork. I was telling Sheila earlier on that I sit at the kitchen table and make my paintings, even though I've got massive studios in Denmark and in Bergen, because I love being around my wife and kids. So a lot of the paintings, the small paintings up in the galleries that you'll see are just painted while the kids are doing their homework. We're sometimes even playing board games while I'm painting, listening to records. I actually have been collecting vinyl for a number of years, and one of the things I really like is to use the duration of one side of a record as a kind of a way of dealing with not only repetitive strain injury, but also with idea of critical reflection. So that sort of 20 minutes, half an hour of the record gives me an opportunity to paint for that period of time, and then I get up, get away from the painting, choose another record or turn it over, and then get back to the painting after having a look at it again. This is an exhibition in Northern Ireland, and it was called the Mobile Museum, and in it I built a shipping container-sized shipping crate. So it looked as if all the exhibition had arrived in a crate. But if you look closely, you can see that it was a total impossibility because the stairs was too small and there was no freight elevator and there's no way of getting it up there. So I constructed this kind of fictional studio within the gallery space. And the paintings around the crate were paintings of museums throughout the world, taken out of their context and placed in natural landscape. So the Guggenheim was taken out of New York, or maybe New York had become a jungle, so it was completely encompassed in a forest or jungle atmosphere. These are some of the installation shots of the interior of the studio. And you'll see with the works in the show that, which came many, many years later, what I'm experimenting with here is kind of taking my painting back to drawing and to kind of to its source. And that's what I wanted to do with the museums. I wanted to kind of question their iconic status and bring them back to the drawing board. Then many years later, or over the last 5 years, I've been developing works where I work with airbrush. And what I find with airbrush, you'll see some of them later on in the talk, is that there's a kind of distancing that occurs, but there's also a referencing to the photograph that's important. This piece is upstairs, a new version of it, and this is called Mobile Museum Retrospective. And what I've done in this is I've taken museums throughout the world. This is the Guggenheim and MMK in Frankfurt, and I've used myself as a kind of test case in being a young artist with aspirations to show in museums, be collected by museums, and I've constructed virtual installations in these museums. It started off when I was at the Irish Museum of Modern Art doing a residency, and the residency program was set up in a former military hospital. It was a British military hospital in Dublin. So the artists are positioned in studios, the stables have been converted into studios. And I find it really interesting, not only with the kind of colonial situation, being Irish and being sort of situated in these stables beside a military hospital, but also with the idea of being a young Irish artist beside a major institution, major national institution. So I went in and I took panoramas, and then I deleted the artists that were on exhibition and stuck my artwork in and exhibited in the gallery. And that, I thought that, you'll see with the piece, but I thought that would, people would immediately see that it was a virtual, it wasn't real, but a lot of people thought that the exhibition had happened and it was just some sort of documentation of the exhibition. Around this period as well, I was working with a series called The Studio in the Woods, and this is a canvas of about 8 foot by 4 foot. And it grew out of a series of works that I'm not going to show tonight because there's not enough time. But I was questioning the whole kind of role of the artist. I was also questioning this phenomenon of the kind of artist celebrity, but also this idea of the artist as a genius, a bit like the way Brancusi's studio is treated in Paris, or the Francis Bacon studio is treated in Dublin. And I wanted to kind of question this kind of notion of genius, because in the old Greek way of thinking of genius, it's not about the person being an incredible person. It's about the genius being like this little devil's advocate on your shoulder that's kind of telling you you're a filter, you're kind of a messenger in a way, rather than being some sort of remarkable person. Although Frank Lloyd Wright would really have disagreed with me there. He definitely thought of himself as a genius. So I wanted to use my position as an artist to question not only my situation as an artist, but also to question my own position in society and my relation to especially architecture. I should probably say I nearly became an architect. When I was finishing high school, I applied to 2 universities in Dublin, and I got past the aptitude tests and got all the points and everything to get into architecture, and I got onto the courses. And I also got into the art academy, so I thought, because my parents were both artists and they were sort of saying, don't be an artist, I thought I would take a kind of a gap year where I would, you can do foundation year and really try out everything from ceramics to fashion to painting and everything. And I just loved it so much that I turned down the 2 university positions in architecture. So I've got a love-hate relationship with architecture. I'm very critical of it, but also I'm a bit of an architecture nerd. This series grew out of that nerdishness, but also out of this kind of questioning of the artist's position in society and architecture's role in society. So I started going shopping basically. Very often, if I can't have something, I'll paint it. So it's my way of processing things. So I've painted your houses so that because I can't live in them, and I think they're fabulous houses. So it's kind of maybe a situation of using that desire, or that element of desire that we're all tied into, especially within consumer society and within the capitalist structure, that again, using myself as a test case to kind of collect these things, and also to take on the role of the collector, or the role of a museum, or the role of a commissioner, and so on. But essentially, the paintings are also about taking these iconic architectural spaces and buildings and turning them back into models, through the process of painting, turning them back into models, bringing them back to a clean slate, bringing them back to the point of creativity, and essentially also turning them into toys.
So I went shopping through architectural journals, through architecture books, and I started not visiting these places, but actually thinking,
Well, what would make the best studio? Now, the Shining, the Overlook Hotel would make a very good studio, but definitely Jack Nicholson thought so. He was kind of going there, and I investigated the Overlook Hotel and did a series of 52 little paintings, which is a bit like crossing Kubrick with Claude Monet. So it's a study of the seasons, but it's also a study of the psychological state in relation to architecture. I was also very interested in the fact that in the original book by Stephen King, the Overlook Hotel is built on a Native American burial ground. So it's essentially that the horror of that sacrilege and the horrors that happen to the Native Americans that are kind of seeping out of the walls, and I found that was very interesting. Also, given that Ireland was the colonial test space for the British colonial project. I'll talk a bit about more about that later on. These are some of the drawings I do. These are some exhibitions in Berlin. More paintings. These are paintings of architecture in Ireland. They're actually by an Irish architecture firm called Bates Maher, and they're little cubicles for priests or for ministers to go on retreat and hang out. So they're kind of like art studios. More paintings, more of the installations. This is a show in New York. In 2008, and it's based around Frank Lloyd Wright and Philip Johnson. And in this painting on the left-hand side here, which you can see a bit better here, what I've taken is falling water. I guess it's about 9 foot by 15 foot or something, just to give you an idea. And it's oil and canvas. Unfortunately, we don't have any of my really big paintings here. We've got my really big drawings here, and my small paintings and some of the medium-scale paintings. And I've just had a retrospective in Ireland of the large-scale paintings. But this one is called Falling Water Seasons Remix. So I've created an impossibility of placing falling water where all seasons are coexisting at the same time. So spring, summer, winter. And the autumn colours at the back looks as if the building is on fire. The painting in the background there is actually a mixture of Frank Lloyd Wright's two things related to Frank Lloyd Wright. One house that was built after his death. It's called Frank Lloyd Wright's Dream, and this is it here. And it's a bedroom in the house. It was kind of controversial because it didn't get approval from the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation. And then what I've done is I've kind of created a view, or it could be a projection in the space, of a scene from North by Northwest by Alfred Hitchcock. And that was a scene which was inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. So the stage designer, stage painter, created his own Frank Lloyd Wright house, which never has existed. So it's like this mixture of two things, one which was a building that was never built during his lifetime, and then controversially built, and another which was about inspiration. This is a show in Los Angeles based on the relationship between the Irish architect and designer Eileen Gray and Le Corbusier, who Eileen Gray was a huge fan of Le Corbusier until he absolutely destroyed her house. Then for many years people thought that it was Le Corbusier's design. And I wanted to investigate, so this exhibition in Los Angeles was investigating that the relationship between the two and Eileen Gray's legacy, but also how it had been disrupted and tarnished by Le Corbusier. This little hut here, so for those of you who don't know, E1027 is this amazing house in the south of France that Eileen Gray designed, and Le Corbusier I think he thought it subconsciously completely summed up his belief system around architecture, all of the different things that he was striving to in his own work. And Eileen Gray also was very straightforward about his influence as well. But then he tried to buy it, and he couldn't buy it, so then he got into the house and managed to cover it with murals, kind of in his Picasso-esque style, and he painted in the nude as well. And he then, when he couldn't buy the house, he built this little cabin next door, and then built another series of cabins for his guests up above. And he eventually died there. He had a heart attack in the water down in the bay. And there was a memorial for him at the house, and it was only in the latter part of Eileen Gray's life, she lived in Paris until a very old age, that it was recognized that it was actually her design in her house. So I'm interested in these stories and these complications, and Eileen Gray is one of the most important designers and architects definitely to come out of Ireland, but I would dispute internationally as well. These are paintings based on Philip Johnson. This is a painting that's upstairs that you'll see, and another one in the background is upstairs, another one which is in a collection in San Francisco. But this was a show based on the book The Glass Room, which is a fictional document of a Mies van der Rohe house in the Czech Republic, and I was interested in engaging with that and the relationship between Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. Quite a lot of that is written in the text, so you'll see it upstairs as well. So I'm trying not to duplicate too many things, but of course, if there's questions about particular works, we can take them afterwards. I'm trying to show you some stuff that isn't upstairs as well. So these are two of the paintings which are upstairs, where I've taken the Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe, which Philip Johnson used as an inspiration, and then I've swapped the colours around, so you have a black Farnsworth house and a white glass house through this kind of simple shift in the colouring. This is the Farnsworth house as it should look. More paintings here. This is about 12 foot by 12 foot, something like that. This is a very small painting, blown up very big, so it's about this size. It's one that I did for a kitchen table. This is a very small painting. This is a Farnsworth house, and it's about this size. Another small painting, big painting. So I'll just skip through this. This is an installation I did at California 101 in San Francisco, and it's a walk-in model of Philip Johnson's glass house, surrounded by, so it's a Philip Johnson building, the skyscraper, and I sort of created a retrospective of Philip Johnson's buildings painted on the walls, and then you walk into this walk-in model of the glass house, and then there's an animation inside which takes the glass house through the seasons in painted format. It's another Philip Johnson building in New York. So I'm skipping for how we're doing for time. I'm just skipping through the paintings. You'll see lots of these paintings upstairs, especially the ones on the right-hand side here. And this was a show in 2016 in Gregory Lynn's gallery in San Francisco. So what I've done with this talk actually is If I try and go chronologically, it gets really confusing. So if I try and show my working practice, it gets really confusing for anybody, because I am working on these type of drawings while I'm making those paintings, while I'm making videos, while I'm making animations, while I'm making installations. So what I try to do is group the different bodies of work together. They're all happening simultaneously. So I put this together. So now we're going to go back in time. Well, this is going back in time a little bit first. This is at the Sheldon Museum, where I had a solo show a few years back, and I created a site-specific exhibition related to Philip Johnston's Sheldon building, Sheldon Museum building, and I also created a piece that was based on the sculpture garden there as well. These are the airbrush paintings I was talking about. So you'll see a lot of the airbrush drawings upstairs, a couple more exhibitions of the paintings, and the black and white works here. So I'll just skip through. Okay, some more of the airbrush. Yeah, so the airbrush paintings are on canvas. This is, I guess, about 40 inches square, and this is based on the Tugendhat Villa. And what I find with the airbrush is that there's a possibility of playing around with a reference to photography, but also with the focus, because, I mean, we live in a photography-dominated era, and we're seeing everything through the lens, but we're also seeing everything through the focus of the lens. So I like the way with the airbrushes, this is a studio view in Denmark, and I like the way there's a possibility for me to have multiple focuses in using the airbrush, because the proximity of the airbrush to the canvas that determines the focus of the image. So you can see this is a large-scale painting, I guess, about 8 foot by 6 foot or something like that. And you can see certain areas of it are more out of focus than other areas. This is a building in one of the case studies buildings in Los Angeles. This is the Tugendhat Villa, again in the Czech Republic. So more airbrush works. Another project I did in Bristol in 2009 was I set up a shipping container down by the harbour, and I met with the public and used the studio. It was very, very cold, and I sort of had a little heater in there, and I was setting up a kind of a ridiculous proposition that I would superimpose Le Corbusier's Plan Voisin for Paris onto Bristol and demolish whole areas of the city. And I just wanted to kind of discuss with the public what they thought about this idea, because if you know Le Corbusier's plan, he was going to demolish huge areas of Paris in order to build these cities in the sky, as well as parks and so on. And I just wanted to kind of, I mean, in a way, I think that as an artist, you can't do so much, and that's a good thing. You can't have a huge impact on society. You can maybe question certain things and so on. But architects can have huge impacts on society. Urban planners can have huge impacts on society. This particular project, which was in 2006, started to become about that. It was in an art centre in an area outside Dublin, which had been farmland 10 years previous. And you can see here I've drawn directly onto the wall here with charcoal, and the tree is the tree that's outside here. So by the end of the show, there was no leaves on the tree, but I was drawing the tree here. And I was trying to highlight how architecture, how we use the natural world in architecture as a punctuation point. So the trees that we have landscaped all around Rochester here, or anywhere in any city in the world, are mediating the architecture. There is kind of a stage set, a virtual space that is being constructed and mediated and homogenized. And I wanted to kind of let the tree get its own back a bit on the building, and sort of graffiti it directly onto the wall. And they become quite sculptural, because this is how the charcoal sort of falls onto the ground. I also then examined through animation, I examined the trajectory of these 10 years of building on this greenfield site and made a series of paintings which became animations of the building being constructed, where the actual art centre ended up being. And then this brings me back to what I was talking about there, about the impact architects can have on society. This is called Panorama. I like shopping centres, and shopping centres like me. And it's based on partially based on Joseph Beuys's seminal work, where he lived with a coyote in the New York Gallery for a number of weeks. But also partially based on an emigre architect called Victor Gruen. And Victor Gruen came over at the same time as Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius, Marcel Breuer and so on, but he had a much bigger impact than them. He was the person who invented the shopping mall. And Victor Gruen invented the shopping mall as a utopian space. He thought that the shopping mall was going to be the best place that you could go to. It was going to take the street and fold it in on itself and make build communities and make all these great things happen. And then the developers got hold of his idea and started spreading all over the States and all over the world. And he kind of had a nervous breakdown and headed back to Europe and started designing for private clients. So I wanted to make a comment on this kind of idea of dystopia and utopia, and also the impact that an idea can have. There's a great quote by W.B. Yeats, which just goes, "In dreams begins responsibility." And I'm not saying that everybody has to kind of think through all their dreams. Poor Einstein didn't know that with the theory of relativity that it was necessarily going to, many years later, contribute to the H-bomb. But there are certain aspects of technology of the world around us that need to be questioned, and definitely urban planning and architecture is one of them. So this is a huge painting which you view from the outside. You can't get into it. And it's based on a hybrid of the 19th century panoramas, but also another form from that period called the Kaiser panorama, which was essentially a type of landscape peep show where you sat around and looked through these lenses. So what I've constructed here are lenses through to the painting, where you see this huge painting, and then lenses where you look into buckets which contain models. So there's this kind of, the big painting looks small models look big, and there's this kind of Alice in Wonderland effect that occurs. And it travelled from Dublin to London, where it was exhibited at the Economist Plaza near Piccadilly Circus, and then it ended up here at the Irish Cultural Centre in the centre of Paris. And I've changed it for each of those cities. This is related to the works that you'll see upstairs, so I'm going to kind of flash through some of these, but this is a piece called the Eames Studio Limerick, and it's where the whole Freugal studio started. And Charles Eames, of the couple Charles and Ray Eames, he was the original kindergartner. So he went through the original Freugal kindergarten, just like Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, Mondrian, Johannes Itten, Walter Gropius, and many others, Kandinsky and so on. Buckminster Fuller as well. And he was actually thrown out of architecture school because he championed Frank Lloyd Wright, and his professors didn't like that. And I found out that Charles Eames' grandfather had emigrated from Limerick in the 1800s, and I wanted to bring the Eames connection back to Limerick for doing this exhibition, so it's called Eames Studio Limerick. And part of the exhibition was a space where I tested out, I built a walk-in model, scale model, of the Eames house and studio in one of the case studies houses in LA, and I constructed an interactive space for children, well, for the public, but it was privileged to children. So you can see the doorway here, and as you just come in, is child height. So if you're an adult, you actually have to walk around the whole structure or get down on your knees and crawl in through there. So it was a testing space for the Freugal studio and what it became. This is Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Chapel, built out of Freugal blocks. And there's several animations upstairs where I take Kandinsky paintings and build them, and Mondrian paintings and build them out of Freugal toys to show that his legacy has basically made a huge mark on modernism, both in terms of art, architecture, and design. This is another work called the Cardboard Furniture Workshop, which was dealing a lot with Alvar Aalto's ideas around furniture and society. This is Freugal Studio the first time I showed it, which was as part of a big group exhibition with people like Mike Kelly and Liam Gillick and Alan Capro and so on. And it was in France, and it was dealing with the idea of the playground as a kind of socially controlling space, space that is used to control children rather than as a positive space in a way. This is the kids in France. It's amazing to see how different kids work with the Freugal Studio in France. They're really, really careful. Kept the different toys and objects on the different tables. In LA, I think it was because it was artist kids, they just went totally nuts. There's a wonderful thing about the Freugal Studio for me is that when I'm building it, as you can see here, this is the installation before it gets attacked, and I spend weeks and months painting and reconstructing and preparing these installations, and then at the opening it all gets completely trashed in a really nice way. This is in Los Angeles, and then this is the kids. It was amazing where they took themes, cards, and Freugal toys, and things that I had made, and Frank Lloyd Wright stuff, and just mashed it all up together. So I use them as kind of research spaces for how they develop in the future. So there's many different iterations of them. These are some of the Freugal toys themselves. They start using the cubes, which I thought would be seating. They use them as boxes and move them around and huge constructions. It's fantastic. My wife makes the crochet balls, by the way, because all the ones I got at the start, they all got stolen by the kids. So, this was in New York, and it was really great to do this piece in a commercial gallery because it meant that we could work with schools from around the corner that weren't normally involved or invited or didn't feel welcome necessarily into the commercial gallery sector, but it also meant we could invite kids from the Bronx and from Brooklyn and from Queens and so on into the space and work with them. And I did a few talks, well, actually not really talks, they're sort of more like workshops where I'm not really doing any work, but just talking to the kids and playing with them. So this is just some images of the setups before the kids come along. And one of the things that sort of cropped up as well is that, you know, I wanted the whole installation to be interactive, and I was a bit unsure about the idea of putting images on the walls because, of course, you can't touch them, although maybe the kids do touch the posters and so on. But I found this was really interesting that in this particular instance, where their sort of kids are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, they were actually making drawings from my images and from the posters that I had done, but also using them as a way of entering into building with the materials. So it was a kind of interactive thing. But I've also developed wall-based works where they involve kind of puzzles and different things. And I want to drill lots of holes in the gallery wall at some point and allow this possibility of inserting in sticks and spheres and so on. So it's still developing. So these are just lots of different versions of the Freugal Studio all over the world. This is the animation that you'll see upstairs. I'll show you a quick clip of it. So this is animating the Freugal toys. So it's stop motion, and I do a lot of stop motion. So perfect. This is here in Rochester, 2016 in the summer. And then it developed into a project which I based on an event that occurred in 1915 in San Francisco, where Maria Montessori did a thing called the Glass Classroom at an exposition in San Francisco. And she had 30 children for, I think, 60 days. They came into this, there were windows on this side and 3 sides of the structure. And the children had their teachers there and just had Montessori education within the space. And what I've been doing is constructing this as in the Science Museum in Bergen. So we've been working with children in Norway and Bangladesh, and we've been discussing the complexity of climate change, especially in relation to rainfall in Bangladesh and in Norway. So it's a little bit complicated to explain, but these tables here are, I've worked with a climate scientist, that's in there, Matthew, in the corner. He's from England, but he lives in Norway. And he's working with rainfall, so he's measuring rainfall in Norway. And when you're measuring rainfall, you have to work with these 10-kilometer and 4-kilometer grids. So it's quite complex on one level, but I've developed this way of using the grids and these small squares representing different levels of precipitation, of rainfall, and we're able to discuss quite complex ideas with the children. We also did a project with the kids where the kids in Norway made a whole series of paintings and drawings based on what was good weather for them, and then we made a trip to Bangladesh and gave the Norwegian kids these paintings as a gift, and then the Bangladeshi kids gave Norwegian kids more paintings, and we brought them back, and we got to see the differences. So for example, in Norway, kids hate playing football in the rain, whereas in Bangladesh they love playing football in the rain because it's so warm. So there's these kind of different relationships to the weather and ideas about climate change and so on. And it's about kind of empowering children in the debate. There's a video piece which is about carbon and the psychology around climate change, but also involves text by Primo Levi, which is about the carbon molecules. So that's upstairs, you can watch it there. This is a PhD student talking to kids about how cyclones develop over the water, and she's able to use the little building blocks and the colours that I constructed the system. So in a way I'm working as a designer for the climate scientists to try and communicate their ideas to children. This was a bicycle tunnel. I work with children in Denmark, so it's 30 meters long, 3 meters wide, seating work with 24 trees. And then I'll just finish off. I've got a couple more minutes, maybe. Just walk through. Okay, 1, 2, 4. This is going to help me back then. So this is the house I grew up in County Donegal. And I've been working very much with this house for a long time because it's got a very personal significance for me, but it is also a way of communicating some of the complexities in Ireland, and the history of Ireland, but also political complexities that occur throughout the world about language, mapping, power, colonization, and so on. So this is a tree that I grew up climbing when I was a child, and in 1999 it blew down, was split by lightning and blew down in a big storm. And I transported the tree up to a gallery space in Ireland, and then I also constructed a roof space. This is a big slated roof, and here with projections of different houses with white roofs around County Donegal. So it was about the kind of migration of the fishing industry and how different communities were being closed down because of changes in the way fish is fished in the sea. But the tree was a tree that in 1689, King James II, an English king, dined under it on the way to the siege of Derry. The house I grew up in isn't a family, wasn't in my family. My parents bought it when I was very small. They were school teachers, and they bought it for next to nothing. And so what I did was I turned the tree into furniture that would have been contemporary with James II and the meal that he had. So this is some of the furniture before it gets turned into furniture, and it's a comment on. So James II was an English Catholic king, and he was not really popular. He had been popular at the time of the Fire of London, and he is actually the person who New York is named after, because he was the Duke of York, when the Dutch gave him New York. So that's why it's called New York, because of course it was called New Amsterdam before that. And he was very popular when he was Duke of York because he saved a lot of lives during the Fire of London. He got a lot of people out very, very quickly. But then he became very unpopular when he decided to turn everybody in England into Catholics, and they didn't want to become Catholics. So William of Orange, who was his brother-in-law, came to fight against him, and he chose Ireland as the battleground because the Irish were sympathetic to his cause. So this is the starting point for the Troubles in Ireland, and I was very interested in this kind of paradox, or all these different paradoxes. So the orange colour that maybe some of you have heard about for the orange marches and everything isn't anything to do with England. It's actually the Dutch colour orange. So the orange marches. So it's this kind of really complex and ridiculous scenario that through history has been transformed, and it ends up with lots of people killing each other. So I wanted to make a piece of work that engaged with that. So I transformed the tree into the furniture, and this is a drawing of the tree in charcoal on the wall, using the actual tree itself. And then I brought you'll see the video piece upstairs, so I'm not going to show it now, but I brought the furniture to a place in England, just south of London, called the New Forest. And James II was the last king to hunt in the New Forest. So I merged the two stories together. So I worked with the English Civil War Reenactment Society, the same guys that worked with Jeremy Deller of the Battle of Orgreave. And we had a day which was 300 years to the day of James II. Well, minus one day. But I decided it was okay because the 20th of April is Hitler's birthday as well, so I didn't really want to do it on Hitler's birthday. So the 19th of April seemed fine, and we had a hunt in the morning. These guys love shooting off gunpowder, so we just got loads of gunpowder and they shot in the forest. And it was based on a Paulo Uccello painting, which is called Hunt in the Forest. And then in the afternoon, the reenactors got into different costumes, and they had a meal and ate food from that period in history. The king is a primary school headmaster, and he was absolutely fabulous. So the work is exhibited in lots of different forms. Yeah, so that's lots more, but I'm going to stop there. Okay. Thank you. Are there any questions?
A great talk, really interesting. And I guess I'm particularly interested in why the architects that you picked, and why as a sort of modernist, idealist, honest architecture. What is it about that selection of architects that you've used as a basis for your art?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because my bachelor's thesis, as Sheila said, I studied at the National College of Art and Design, and I did a bachelor's of joint honours in art history and painting. So I was focusing very much in a study on Irish art history right back to pre-Christian, to the kind of Celtic period. And I chose for my bachelor's thesis, I chose to write about the architectural history of my parents' house, the house I grew up in. So I had to go to all the Office of Public Records in Belfast and in Dublin, and look through old deeds and testaments. It was going to be a sociological study to start off with, but then I suddenly realised I had to focus, and I was reading about brick thicknesses and taxes and windows and all sorts. So I was very much into vernacular architecture of the period, and actually was working as a builder on restoring. So when I was a child, a lot of the outbuildings, which some of them were semi-fortified because the house was owned by a man called Sir Richard Hansard, who was a British soldier that had been given the property there in lieu of all the battles he had won, because the crown couldn't pay him, I guess. So he was in charge of the garrison in Lifford, and it was contemporary with the colonial period here, and it was used as a kind of testing ground and so on. So, Derry was founded at the same time as Boston, I think, and it's kind of based on a similar city structure and so on. Actually, Derry is based on the Roman castrum city plan. And that's also kind of colonial thing as well with the Romans, because they designed the Roman castrum city plan so that the Roman soldiers would know where to get their bread, and they could kind of go from city to city, but they'd know where everything was located. So I was really into architecture, into especially this particular house, and I slated roofs and built doors, and some of the buildings had trees growing out of it and were roofless, and we kind of restored the whole thing. My grandfather was head of the National Trust in Northern Ireland and an OBE, and he was very involved in conservation, both with houses but also with landscape. So he bought up, on behalf of the National Trust, several parts of the Northern Irish coastline here, the Giant's Causeway, and protected it from being turned into golf resorts and things like that. So I sort of inherited a lot of his interest, and then just an aside, my Star Wars collection, he was the one that persuaded me to keep all my boxes, because he then became head of Christie's, so he's like, you've got to keep your boxes. So then the interest in modernism, I guess, arrived through Frank Lloyd Wright, especially. But I mean, I'm a bit nerdy about kind of collecting things, as you can probably tell, and also the way I can approach my artwork. So I have, like I said, I have this love-hate relationship with modernism, but I've chosen it as a vehicle because I think it's more interesting than, say, the postmodern period that we're in now, or the post-postmodern period of architecture that we're in now, or post-history or whatever, because modernism comes at a moment, I think, not just in architecture, but I'm particularly interested in architecture because it can have a huge effect on society. There comes at a moment where people are generally trying to do good. They're trying to design humanistic buildings that are respectful of the natural setting and that are harmonious and so on. But by and large, it's a noble failure, and I'm interested in that failure. A lot of these, Frank Lloyd Wright, when he built Falling Water, the concrete wasn't ready for him because he should have waited 50 years to have the right type of concrete to build a house on a waterfall. So it's now being restored. It's now a restoration problem. When there's a story about him where he gets a call very soon after somebody's moved into one of his houses, and the person is saying, there's water coming in the piano, and it says move the piano. That was kind of, he was really working out these ideas and working them out in the moment and so on, and made lots and lots of mistakes. So I'm sort of interested in that period of modernism. Also, it's a period which is far enough back in the past that one can kind of look back on and realize things in hindsight and maybe critique things in some ways. So I'm trying to kind of come to terms with the present and the future by looking into the recent past, I guess.
You said architects have more of an influence than artists, but it seems like buildings are not only subject to nature, but the latest human who wants to destroy a building. Will you ever want to take your history, because you're so young, and convert to an architect?
That's a really good question. No, I've been thinking a lot about that, and I've been fighting with architects quite recently, actually. I don't know if you know of the Norwegian firm Snøhetta, and they designed the World Trade Center Memorial and the new extension to SF MoMA. and they just designed our art academy, our new building. And it's a fabulous building on some levels, but they've really focused on form over function. So I've been battling with them about why have they coated our project hall with white oil, this massive space where they've got plywood everywhere and they've coated it with white oil. It's super expensive, but also our students, we can't paint over the walls. The wood is really hardwood and you can't drill into the walls. And it's just an aesthetic space. I was moderating a panel recently in Bergen, and I said to the architect who was there, you know, why didn't you design the project hall like SF MoMA, like the galleries there? And she said, oh, it's about this and that, and it's about cleansing your brain and all this sort of stuff. And I just said, well, you know, it's kind of interesting for us because you've designed a type of corporate foyer, you know, like a bank foyer, and maybe our students can use that as a way to kind of explore the idea of commissioning and so on. So in answer to your question, I'm still undecided whether I want to be an architect. I am designing because of the things that the architects have done and the lack of studio space for students. I'm designing studios for the students up in the mountains. So the shipping container project I did, working with other colleagues and also with a commissioning agency, an art commissioning agency in Bergen, and we're going to set up these, probably about 10 little studios where the students can book out and use them as project spaces. So that'll be my first building. But another project that I'm working on in Denmark, which I can just show you some slides of quickly, is the sort of the most current thing, I guess, in what I'm doing. There's a video about it upstairs, but I have, in 2009, I took over a plant nursery with 6,000 square meters of greenhouses, so this is one of my greenhouses. And I'm taking, so it's kind of anti-architecture in a way, I'm basically taking down these greenhouses, and in 20 years or 30 years, or I don't know whether I'll be dead or the project will be over, we'll see. But I'm doing it by myself. So it's going to be a forest. So this is the greenhouse as it was, and when we moved in, all these dead plants and so on. And now I've taken all these tables out, not taking all the glass out, because actually we're keeping bees, and the bees go into the weeds that I'm growing in here. And they're protected from the monoculture farming, pesticides, and all the stuff that drifts across it's kind of like a mini ecosystem. And then we're obviously getting honey from the greenhouses. And then I make these installations based on the project. So these are photographs I've been working on it for the last 10 years, and taking hundreds of thousands of photographs of the disintegration of the spaces. It's kind of dealing with entropy in a way, but it's an anti-land art piece as well as an anti-architecture piece, because I'm not necessarily making everything, I'm removing things, but also letting nature take its course as well. So I guess it is a type of architectural practice, but maybe not conventional.
Did you have one? Okay.
I grew up in Cloquet, Minnesota, and we have a Frank Lloyd Wright gas station up there. And I was just wondering, when, for the ones that are going to be seen here, did you get a chance to see any of the other also Frank Lloyd Wright houses in the region? And over the course of your life, which ones had been your most favorite and why?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. When I started off in the project, I made quite a point of not visiting any of the houses, because it was about fantasy. It was about kind of like trying to imagine a space that would be a perfect space in a way. And I was thinking about fairy tales, so I was thinking of like Brothers Grimm, stories like Hansel and Gretel, you know, so you look at a house on the outside, it looks really good to eat, but then you go inside and it eats you up. So that's quite interesting in The Shining. And I'm quite tall, and Frank Lloyd Wright generally built his houses for a certain size, which was his size. So I don't think Falling Water would be a kind of perfect place for me to live, but I haven't been to Falling Water yet. I've been to Frank Lloyd Wright houses in Chicago. There's actually a Frank Lloyd Wright building in San Francisco, which I visited recently, which was taken over by Gwyneth Paltrow's company and used as a kind of salon for a little while, and now it's in between letting. So I was kind of looking at that. I'd love to go to the gas station in the show. There's actually the Elliott Noyes mobile gas station, so I would really like to paint that one. And I know that there's other Frank Lloyd Wright houses in this area that I'd like to visit. But I managed to visit the only warehouse that Frank Lloyd Wright designed, and that's incredible. It's in his hometown near Spring Green, and it's like something out of Blade Runner. It's just absolutely incredible, and it has a museum inside it of this old exhibition of photographs that was touring. So, like I said, I'm a bit nerdy about it all, but also kind of critical. You know, he didn't seem to be that pleasant a person. He never paid his debts, and he wasn't very nice to his staff and so on, because he thought that everything was for their good because he was a genius. So.
And then you have a slide with an image from Can we see?
Yeah.
You keep flashing past it, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, so it's a very simple quote, and I guess I put it in there because there's a Smithson quote in there as well, but it's just about the fact that, you know, even though that project I did about my parents' house, about the house I grew up in, about the tree I climbed as a child, is a very personal work. It's an incredibly political work, but I think an abstract painting is a political gesture. So there's not, you know, I just really think it's an interesting quote to think about, that these type of gestures, and maybe there is a certain power to the artist, but it's not necessarily, you know, the type of power that sort of, you know, transforms whole cities or whole kind of, you know, invents the shopping mall or something else. It's a criticality. There's a wonderful essay by Marshall McLuhan called, it's a very short essay, it's from I think 1953 or something like that, and it's called The Relation of the Environment to the Anti-Environment. And when he's writing in this essay, he's talking about television, and he says that, you know, he talks about the environment as being the emerging environment. So television at that time was the emerging environment, and it reminds me of the stories my dad told me about TVs arriving in Belfast. You know, how wonderful it was. Like, he used to always go to the cinema, and then suddenly there was a TV in somebody's house on the street, and then everybody would congregate around this little black box and watch the TV, and it was like a real kind of social thing. And very few people had TVs, and they were like, oh, this is sort of like cinema, but more social, and we're hanging out together, and it's great, and so on. But then Marshall McLuhan sort of talks about the way that then transforms, and it becomes an alienating device. Everybody has a TV in every house, and then everybody has a TV in every room, and then the families are kept apart by them, and so on and so forth. And what he says is the anti-environment is stuff that isn't instrumentalized. So George Orwell's 1984 would be an example of that, or A Brave New World, and we're seeing that all being kind of caught up in the mix right now with fake news and all the stuff that's happening in contemporary society. But we need the anti-environment in order to question. You know, technology is not neutral. I'm not saying technology is bad or good or whatever, but it's not neutral. You put one bit of technology in a room in relation to another bit of technology in a room, and it suddenly starts to have consequences. So I think all art is political, and I agree with him.
I have one real quick one. Since you've been here in 2016, and now you're back at the beginning of 2018, and you're incredibly not only prolific but well-traveled. You're teaching in Bergen, you're going to Bangladesh, 2 visits to Rochester, southern Minnesota, Wisconsin. What are your thoughts about our area? What is struck you about the local?
I love it. I think it's a great part of the world, and what's been wonderful about being able to come back here was I went on one of the trial trolley tours of the area, so I got to see your houses again, but in the snow. So there might be some snow paintings coming up, and you know, to kind of experience Rochester in the different seasons and to kind of see how how people cope with the snow here compared to how people cope with the snow in Norway or Denmark, and but I find it a really interesting place because it reminds me of Ireland in a way. It reminds me of the kind of rural areas that I grew up in, and because it's very much a sort of farming area that I grew up in, and the kind of potential of that. But also, I just visited Minneapolis for the first time on this trip, and to visit the Walker and the sculpture garden there was really fantastic. And I think this building here is a tremendous resource to the local community. I just think it's incredibly well designed. It's super functional in relation to how things are thought out in terms of where the process room is, where the elevator is. If you haven't seen the show already, I've raided the wood shop downstairs, and it's amazing to have such a resource like that, the wood shop, for artists to actually make works in the process of making an exhibition. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been out much this time because not because I don't like snow, because I love this weather, but and I find the sort of Christmas of the days and walking to the art centre has been fabulous. But it's been a pretty busy install. There's a lot of artworks that we put up, but luckily we've front-loaded the trip with the trip to Minneapolis, so that was good.
There's just a question about, you sort of mentioned British colonialism and sort of historical multiple layers and sort of influences. And I'm just curious, does any of that come into how you deal with modernist architecture, and is that something that sort of we can look for, or is it something that just something that's influenced you in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I come from a background where it's not kind of but sort of polar opposites, because I was brought up Catholic, but my mother was brought up Protestant and she's English. And I went to a Catholic school when I was in primary school, but then I went to a Protestant school in secondary school. As I said, my grandfather was head of the National Trust. He was an OBE, he was a trained opera singer, so very kind of middle to upper class Anglo-Irish. So I have a huge English tradition in my family. My family goes back to, can be traced back to John Gaunt. He's not a very nice guy, but he was a king, I guess. But on the other side, my father grew up on the Falls Road in Belfast, and he went to the same school as the year ahead of Jerry Adams, and he was right in the middle of the Troubles. You can't sort of say one set of cousins are bad and the other set of cousins are good, and it's the thing you deal with. And to be honest, I mean, I lived on the border, so when we were getting the papers every Sunday, we'd have to go through the checkpoints and all the machine guns and tanks and everything. And I thought it was super exciting because I was into Star Wars, so you had all this stuff around you. And of course, you were told not to play with your toy guns by the window when I was visiting my grandmother in Belfast, But you just deal with it, and I guess it was a war zone, and I am kind of conflicted with different things. I consider myself Irish, but I have a tremendous relation to my Anglo-Irish past. And then with the question of the architecture, I guess it's kind of bound up in all of that. I mean, the house I grew up in is Georgian in style, and that's a colonial house, So it's a kind of a complicated one, but I think I hadn't really thought about it in relation to modernism. I mean, Alison Peter Smithson are some architects, English architects, who I found very interesting to the project about them, and the panorama was shown at the Acatas Plaza. So I was very interested in their ideas around social housing and how that failed with Robin Hood Gardens and other projects. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's kind of a few thoughts.
So thank you very, very much for your presentation.